Amina was living the life many only dreamed of. She was a successful entrepreneur in Dar es Salaam, running her own thriving business and married to Derrick, a handsome and ambitious man who turned heads wherever he went. Together, they seemed like the perfect couple. Their home was beautiful, filled with laughter, love, and the kind of warmth that made people envious. They shared dreams, supported each other, and had built a life that looked flawless from the outside. But behind the smiles and Instagram-worthy moments, something slowly began to change. Derrick, once so present and attentive, started coming home later than usual. He gave excuses, meetings that ran late, business dinners, sudden trips. At first, Amina believed him. She wanted to believe him. After all, this was her husband, her partner, her best friend. Still, a strange feeling settled in her heart. Something didn't feel right. The way Derrick avoided eye contact, the way his phone was suddenly always on silent, the way he had stopped asking about her day. Amina tried to brush it off, telling herself not to overthink. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she was being paranoid. She didn't want to be the jealous wife who jumped to conclusions. So she smiled through the doubt. She kept pretending everything was fine. But deep down she knew. Something had shifted in her perfect life, and the cracks were only getting deeper. Amina wasn't looking for anything when she picked up Derrick's jacket that afternoon. It had been lying on the couch for days, and she was just trying to tidy up. But as she reached into the pocket to check for anything before putting it in the laundry, her fingers brushed against a small folded paper. Curious, she pulled it out. It was a receipt. Not just any receipt, but one from an expensive hotel restaurant in the city. A dinner for two. The date was just a few days ago. And at the bottom, written in neat cursive, was the name Lydia. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the name. Lydia? Who was Lydia? It wasn't a business meeting, the timing was too personal. Amina's hands trembled as a wave of confusion and fear washed over her. She wanted to believe there was an explanation, but deep down, a part of her already knew the truth. Still, she needed proof. She needed to see it with her own eyes. The next evening, she quietly followed Derrick when he said he had a late meeting. Her heart pounded in her chest as she kept a safe distance behind him, praying she was wrong. But when he stopped at a small, cozy cafe, not a boardroom or an office, her worst fears started to come alive. Through the window, she saw him. There he was, sitting across from a woman Amina had never seen before. She was pretty, well-dressed, and smiling like they shared a secret. And Derrick, he was laughing, holding her hand across the table, looking at her like Amina no longer existed. Time seemed to freeze. Tears welled up in Amina's eyes, but she didn't move. She just stood there, watching the man she loved living a life she knew nothing about. Her heart broke quietly, painfully. All the moments they had shared, the promises, the dreams, they all collapsed in that one silent moment. Derrick hadn't just betrayed her. He had erased her. And that hurt more than anything. Amina couldn't sleep that night. After seeing Derrick with another woman, everything inside her felt broken. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her heart heavy, her mind racing. How could the man she trusted the most lie to her like that? How could he smile at another woman while she waited for him at home, still believing in their love? For days, Amina went through a storm of emotions: pain, anger, sadness, disbelief. She kept hoping it was all a bad dream. But no matter how much she cried or tried to understand, one thing became clear: she couldn't stay in this marriage. Not after the betrayal. Not after everything they had built had been torn apart by lies. With a trembling heart but a strong mind, she made her decision. She was going to end it. Filing for divorce wasn't easy. It felt like giving up on a life she had worked so hard to build. But Amina knew she deserved better. She deserved honesty, love, and respect, not secrets and heartbreak. When she told Derrick, he was shocked. He didn't expect her to take such a bold step. He tried to talk her out of it, saying it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But Amina wasn't the same woman anymore. She looked at him and said, "You made a choice, Derrick. And now I'm making mine." She started gathering everything: messages, photos, the receipt she found, all the proof of his affair. She was preparing for the divorce hearing, and she wasn't going to stay silent. She had been quiet for too long. This wasn't just about leaving him. It was about standing up for herself. Amina was heartbroken, yes, but she was also waking up to her own strength. She had loved him deeply, but now she loved herself enough to walk away. The day Amina had been dreading finally came: the divorce hearing. She woke up with a heavy heart and shaky hands, barely able to eat breakfast. But she knew she had to face it. This was the day everything would be laid bare. The day her truth would be heard. She dressed simply but with quiet confidence, and walked into the courtroom with her head held high, surrounded by the people who still loved her, her family, her close friends, all there to support her. As she took her seat, her eyes scanned the room trying to calm her nerves. Then the door opened and Derrick walked in. Just like always, he wore that confident smile, the one that used to melt her heart. He looked polished, relaxed, as if he had nothing to lose. But what made Amina's breath catch in her throat was the woman walking beside him. It was Lydia. The same Lydia she had seen in the cafe. The same woman from the receipt. The same woman who had been secretly with her husband. And now there she was, sitting beside Derrick like she belonged there, smiling sweetly as if this was just another day out. Amina's heart sank. She couldn't believe the audacity. Derrick hadn't come to show remorse. He hadn't come to make things right. Instead, he brought the very woman who broke their marriage, flaunting her like some twisted trophy. It felt like a punch to the gut. The room suddenly felt colder. Amina blinked back tears, but she didn't look away. She kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to let them see her fall apart. Her hands clenched in her lap, but her back stayed straight. She reminded herself why she was here. Not to beg, not to break, but to stand up for herself. Let them sit there and smile. She had a different plan. One they weren't ready for. Amina sat there in the courtroom, staring at Derrick and Lydia, trying to stay calm. Her heart was racing, but her face stayed still. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, the man she had once loved, sitting there like nothing was wrong, with the very woman who had torn their marriage apart. Lydia smiled, smug and unbothered, like this was some kind of game. Derrick looked proud, almost like he had won something. But what they didn't know was that Amina had already made her move. She had been hurting in silence for weeks, but she hadn't just cried, she had done her homework. After discovering Lydia's name, Amina had gone digging. She found out that Lydia wasn't single. In fact, Lydia was married too, to a man named Jabari who lived in Kigali. Amina had found him on social media, and after a few messages, they finally spoke. Jabari had no idea what was going on. When Amina told him everything, he was shocked. Heartbroken. Furious. Just like her. They talked for hours. Shared everything they knew. Photos. Dates. Lies. It all came together like pieces of a puzzle. And then they made a decision they would face this betrayal together. If Derrick and Lydia thought they were going to walk into that courtroom and win, they were in for a surprise. Now, sitting in that room, watching her cheating husband play the victim, Amina didn't feel weak anymore. She had felt powerless before, broken and alone. But not today. Today, she had a partner in truth, someone who had also been lied to, someone who understood her pain. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about standing up and showing them that actions have consequences. Amina took a deep breath, her fingers steady now. The plan was already in motion. The tables were about to turn, and this time, she wouldn't be the one left in pieces. The courtroom buzzed with quiet whispers as the hearing began. Amina sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm but her heart pounding. She had been through so much, but today was different. Today, she was ready. She wasn't here to cry or beg. She was here to be heard and to make sure Derrick and Lydia finally faced the truth. Just as the judge was about to speak, Amina slowly stood up. All eyes turned to her. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Instead, she looked toward the door right on cue. The doors opened, and in walked Jabari. Tall, confident, and serious, he stepped into the room like a quiet storm. The entire courtroom seemed to freeze. Gasps filled the air. People looked from him to Lydia, then back again, trying to understand what was happening. Jabari's eyes went straight to Lydia, not angry, not shouting, just a deep, cold stare. Lydia's face went pale. Her smile vanished. Her body stiffened like a child caught doing something wrong. Derrick looked confused at first, then uncomfortable. Jabari didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His presence alone said everything. He walked calmly across the room and took a seat beside Amina, not even glancing at Derrick. Amina felt a wave of strength wash over her as he sat next to her, not as a new partner, not as revenge, but as someone who had suffered the same betrayal. They were united in truth. The tension in the room was thick. You could feel it in the air, heavy and sharp. Lydia couldn't look up. Derrick fidgeted in his seat, his confidence starting to crack. Amina didn't look at them. She didn't need to anymore. She had walked into that courtroom alone, but now she had someone beside her who understood her pain, someone who made sure the truth couldn't be ignored any longer. The silence said more than words ever could. And this was just the beginning. The room was quiet, but the silence was heavy like a storm waiting to explode. Lydia sat frozen in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. She kept glancing at Jabari, then quickly looking away, her hands shaking slightly in her lap. She didn't smile this time. The confidence she had walked in with was gone. Her eyes darted around, searching for a place to hide, but there was none. Derrick, on the other hand, tried to keep his cool. He leaned back in his chair, trying to act calm, pretending like everything was fine. But Amina knew him too well. She could see the way he avoided her eyes. The way his jaw clenched just a little too tightly. He was nervous, and behind the fake calm, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: guilt. Jabari sat beside Amina without saying a single word, but his silence spoke louder than any outburst. He didn't need to yell. His presence alone was enough to shake the entire room. Just sitting there, still and serious, he made sure Lydia felt every second of her choices. It was the kind of silence that exposed the truth better than shouting ever could. Then Amina stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. Her tone was steady, clear, and calm, and somehow that made it even more powerful. She looked straight at the judge and began to speak. She told the story of her marriage, of the love and trust she had given Derrick, of the nights she waited, the lies she believed, and the moment her heart broke when she saw him with Lydia. She showed the messages, the photos, the receipt, every detail. But more than the proof, it was her voice, her quiet strength that made the room listen. She didn't need to destroy Derrick. She just needed to tell the truth. And when she finished, the courtroom was still. No one said a word. Because the truth didn't need noise. It just needed to be heard. The courtroom was quiet. Everyone sitting on the edge of their seats as Amina continued to speak. With calm hands and steady words, she began showing the judge what she had brought. Clear, undeniable proof of Derrick and Lydia's affair. First, she laid out printed messages between them, full of sweet words and secret plans. Then came the photos, of them laughing together at cafes, standing close at hotel lobbies, and even checking in under fake names. People in the room whispered in shock, shaking their heads. But Amina wasn't finished. She had saved the most powerful piece for last. She reached into her folder and pulled out a letter. A neatly written page that held the truth from someone who had been just as betrayed as she was. It was from Jabari. She held it up and said, "This is a letter from Lydia's husband." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Amina began to read parts of it aloud. In the letter, Jabari described how he had discovered Lydia's lies, how she would tell him she was traveling for work, only to secretly meet Derrick in hotels. He wrote about his pain, the confusion, and how everything started to make sense when Amina contacted him. His words were raw and honest. He explained how his marriage had been falling apart without knowing why, and how discovering the truth crushed him. As Amina read, Lydia sat frozen, her face pale and her lips pressed tightly together. She didn't move. She couldn't. Even Derrick looked down now, avoiding everyone's gaze. When Amina finished, the silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. The judge looked serious, the audience stunned. It wasn't just a messy affair anymore. It was a betrayal that had crossed 2 families, 2 marriages, and so many hearts. The truth was now out in the open, and no one could pretend anymore. What Amina had done wasn't just bold, it was brave. She had brought the full story into the light, and in that moment it was clear who had been honest. Derrick stood up slowly, trying to fix his tie and put on a calm face, but his voice shook as he began to speak. "It was a mistake," he said, trying to explain. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." He looked at the judge, then at Amina, as if hoping his words would undo the truth that had just been revealed. "It just happened. I didn't plan it," he added, his eyes pleading. But it was too late. The judge, who had been watching and listening quietly the whole time, finally leaned forward. His expression was serious, his voice steady and clear. "This was not a mistake," he said. "This was a choice, a repeated choice. A betrayal not only of your wife, but of the family you promised to protect." The courtroom went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Then the judge delivered the verdict. He ruled in Amina's favor. She would keep the house. She would receive the majority of their shared assets. And most importantly, she was granted full custody of their children. The courtroom remained quiet, but you could feel the energy shift. Amina had won. Not just legally, but emotionally. She had stood strong in the face of betrayal and refused to be broken. Derrick's face turned red. He looked around the room, embarrassed, defeated. For the first time, he didn't look charming. He looked small. He quickly gathered his things and tried to leave the courtroom without saying another word. But as he passed by Amina, she stood in his path. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked him in the eye and said, softly but firmly, "You lost everything today, Derrick. Not just your marriage, but your dignity." Derrick didn't reply. He couldn't. He simply lowered his head and walked out the door, the man who once had it all, now left with nothing but regret. Months passed, and slowly, Amina's world began to feel calm again. The pain was still there sometimes late at night or when a memory would flash across her mind, but it didn't control her anymore. She had made it through the storm and now it was time to rebuild. She poured her heart into her business. Work became her healing space. She started a women's support program, a small community where women who had gone through betrayal and heartbreak could come together, talk, and lift each other up. Amina shared her story openly, not to get sympathy but to show others that they weren't alone and that healing was possible. She was no longer just a businesswoman. She had become a voice of strength, courage, and hope. Her children, who had once felt the tension at home, were now thriving. Their house felt warm again, filled with laughter and peace. Amina made sure they knew love didn't mean pain, and that walking away from what breaks you isn't weakness, it's power. As for Derrick, life didn't go the way he expected. His charm couldn't save him anymore. People saw through the lies. His relationship with Lydia crumbled as quickly as it had begun. Jabari moved on stronger than ever, while Derrick was left alone to face the wreckage of his choices. And Amina? She didn't look back. She found peace not from revenge but from knowing she chose herself. She didn't just survive betrayal. She turned it into a new beginning. A beginning that was finally hers.